Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we are going to completely unpack one of the most notoriously confusing, endlessly debated plays of the 20th century. I'm talking about Samuel Beckett's masterpiece, Waiting for Godot. Now, a lot of people approach this play, read it, and just scratch their heads, because, spoiler alert, literally nothing actually happens. But as we're about to discover together, that absolute total lack of action, well, that's exactly the point.
Right off the bat, the play opens with this incredibly iconic, hilarious, yet deeply frustrated line, "Nothing to be done." Estragon spits this out while he's just endlessly, hopelessly struggling to pull off a tight boot. And it perfectly sets the mood for the entire experience. It's this bizarre mix of slapstick comedy and tragic hopelessness. You just have these two shabby guys hanging out by a dead tree, desperately trying to pass the time.
And this brilliantly illustrates the story's totally circular, repetitive loop. Think about it. Day 1, they're waiting for this mysterious Godot guy. Day 2, they have the exact same conversations, the exact same weird antics, and yep, still waiting. They keep getting told he'll surely come tomorrow, but you guessed it, he never actually arrives. They talk about leaving, they talk about repenting, they even casually discuss hanging themselves from the tree just to break up the boredom, but they never actually move an inch. Now, if we look at the genre this play basically helped create, the theater of the absurd, things really start to click into place. On the surface, sure, it just looks like clownish nonsense. But if you peel back the layers just a little bit, Beckett is essentially showing us a full-blown existential crisis happening in real time. By stripping away all the traditional plot devices you'd expect, we are left staring directly at the inherent purposelessness of life. Heavy stuff, right? So without a traditional plot to keep things moving, all the heavy lifting falls entirely on the characters themselves. But they aren't just everyday, normal people. No, they operate as these deeply symbolic dualities. It's like they're two contrasting halves of a single human psyche, just stumbling around trying to navigate a completely meaningless world. Let's look at our two main guys to see this in action. On the one hand, you've got Vladimir. He represents the mind. He's logical, he's the intellectual, he's always working so hard to fit their bizarre experiences into some kind of logical timeline. Plus, he is constantly fixating on his hat, looking inside it for answers. Then, on the other hand, you have Estragon, representing the body. He relies purely on intuitive feelings, he constantly complains about his physical suffering, and he's entirely obsessed with those tight, painful boots. Logic versus feeling, hat versus boots, mind versus body. And honestly, this whole concept of duality is baked into absolutely everything here. You have Vladimir and Estragon, Didi and Gogo. You have two travelers they meet, Pozo and Lucky. There's a messenger boy who tends sheep, and oh look, he has a brother who tends goats. Even the structure itself, Act 2 perfectly, flawlessly mirrors Act 1. This constant mirroring traps everyone in an endless dual loop, constantly underscored by the harsh reality that, but Godot never comes. Okay, so the only real break in the grueling monotony of all this waiting comes with the sudden, chaotic arrival of two other travelers, Pozo and Lucky. They crash onto the scene and briefly break up the wait, injecting a whole new, totally wild dynamic of absurdity to this random roadside. Pozo is this incredibly boisterous, wealthy landowner type, and Lucky is his completely subservient slave. Much like our main duo, Pozo and Lucky are total opposites, violently tied together. Pozo is the so-called master. He's obsessed with outward appearances and these ridiculous, formal social conventions. Lucky is the slave, literally being led around by a rope tied to his neck. But here is the bizarre twist. Lucky actually has the physical ability to leave, but he doesn't. He willingly chooses to stay. He even breaks down crying at the mere thought of being let go. It's completely baffling. But the play flips this dynamic on its head to reveal that Pozo's power is just a total illusion. By the time Act 2 rolls around, Pozo comes back completely blind and pitifully dependent on Lucky just to walk. They literally both fall down in the dirt and can't even get back up. It's a pretty stark reminder from Beckett that in an absurd, random universe, all the wealth and social dominance in the world offer absolutely zero protection against sudden misfortune. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Beckett uses totally mundane, everyday physical objects to drive these massive existential themes home. You see, the characters don't just sit around talking about their internal struggles. They physically interact with these heavy metaphors that spell out their tragedy for us. Let's break a few of these down.
First up, the leafless tree. In Act 1, it's completely bare. It perfectly captures this barren, lifeless world they're stuck in. But then, in Act 2, it suddenly sprouts 4 or 5 leaves. Now, you'd think that means hope, right? Wrong. Instead of offering hope, this tiny random change just completely heightens their confusion. They suddenly can't tell if a single day has passed, or a whole season, or maybe an entire lifetime. Next, we have to talk about Lucky's baggage. He carries these incredibly heavy bags non-stop. He never puts them down unless he is explicitly ordered to, and then he just immediately picks them back up again. It perfectly represents how we, as humans, enslave ourselves to completely unnecessary burdens. And the ultimate punchline? In Act 2, we find out one of these heavy bags is literally just filled with sand. He is suffering strictly out of pure mindless habit. Then there's the rope. Pozzo drives Lucky around Lucky on this physical leash, which is, of course, the ultimate symbol of submission. But really, the rope mirrors Vladimir and Estragon's figurative tie to Godot. Think about it. All of these men are tethered to something entirely illogical. They're all actively choosing submission over freedom, going so far as to casually contemplate hanging themselves with a rope just to make the time go by faster. Finally, we have the hats. Now, hats in this play very clearly represent identity and thought. Remember, Vladimir represents the mind, and he is constantly messing with his hat. But the absolute best example is Lucky. When Pozzo commands him to think, Lucky can only produce this frantic, unhinged, rambling philosophical speech if he is physically wearing his hat on his head. The speech only stops when the hat is forcefully snatched away. Later on, Vladimir and Estragon end up juggling 3 hats between the two of them in this totally clownish, aimless diversion. Again, just desperately trying to make time pass. And, well, that brings us right back to the crushing reality of their situation. Despite the hats, despite the tree, the rope, and all the crazy distractions, but Godot never comes. It is the defining anchor of hopelessness in the entire narrative. The stage just remains empty of the one single thing they believe will finally give their lives meaning. So when we pull all these wild elements together, the core messages become incredibly clear. Beckett is vividly illustrating the utter, inescapable absurdity of human existence. Vladimir and Estragon's endless wait highlights the sheer folly of seeking meaning from some outside source, like a Godot, instead of actually creating it for yourself, all while being psychologically tortured by the deep uncertainty of time and memory. This entire tragic situation is captured perfectly by Vladimir when he says, "But habit is a great deadener." So the crucial point is, these characters aren't being kept on that dirt road by high walls or physical prison bars. Not at all. They are completely trapped by their own habits. The habit of waiting, the habit of complaining, and the habit of hoping for some magical savior absolutely deadens their ability to take any real action in their own lives. Because of this deadening habit, time itself basically becomes an illusion for them. A messenger boy continually arrives at the end of the day saying, "Oh, Godot will surely come tomorrow." But because they absolutely refuse to break their habits, tomorrow just morphs into another absurd repetitive today. They remain entirely frozen in a timeline that, practically speaking, doesn't even exist. Which brings us to the ultimate, lingering question this absurd masterpiece leaves us with. And I want you to really think about this. What is your Godot? We've seen how Vladimir and Estragon waste their entire lives waiting by a barren tree for an illusion to bring them purpose. But what is the external validation or that magical future event that you are endlessly waiting for to finally start living your life? It's a slightly uncomfortable thought, for sure. But hey, that is the exact undeniable genius of the absurd. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today.